órbita lunar e, sobretudo, por tirá-los de órbita e mandá-los de volta à Terra. 3 dias após o lançamento, Collins ligou o motor e a propulsão de 9.500 quilos reduziu a velocidade da nave, fazendo com que entrasse em órbita lunar.
And the engine was designed beautifully with as much simplicity as possible. It was an engine that used the fuel that was called hypergolic. Hypergolic fuel is fuel that will ignite on contact, so you don't need an ignition system.
A Apollo 11 estava em órbita lunar. A viagem fora longa e eles se preparavam para prosseguir à fase seguinte da missão, tentar pousar na Lua. Mas pilotar os módulos de comando e lunar envolvia desafios jamais enfrentados por um piloto. Em uma época de computadores que ocupavam o espaço de uma sala, era preciso algo compacto e eficaz para guiar a nave espacial.
The guidance and navigation system was amazing, and today when I look back at it 35 years ago, it was even more amazing. It had all of 60,000 words in it. Today, if you don't have gigabytes of memory, you don't seem to be able to get along. The computer that landed in the landing module was built specifically one time for that mission.
Com cerca de 1 metro quadrado e pesando 35 quilos, era considerado compacto. O computador do módulo lunar era um prodígio da engenharia para a época. Outro idêntico guiava o módulo de comando.
The little handheld calculator that you could go in and buy at Walmart would be as powerful as the guidance computer we had on the landing vehicle.
Mas enquanto Armstrong e Aldrin preparavam o módulo lunar para pousar, o controle preocupava-se com um acontecimento inesperado que poderia causar grande impacto na missão. 20 de julho. A Apollo 11 estava na órbita da Lua há menos de um dia. Quando Armstrong e Aldrin preparavam o módulo lunar, submetendo-o a horas de testes, receberam notícias preocupantes da base. O controle da missão estava preocupado com um intruso no espaço. Os soviéticos haviam lançado uma sonda não tripulada na órbita lunar, coincidindo com a chegada da Apollo 11. Foram feitas tentativas de contato com os russos, mas ninguém sabia ao certo para que era a sonda ou se sua órbita colocaria a tripulação da Apollo 11 em perigo.
The Soviets were actually trying to pull off a sample return mission, a robotic sample return mission. It was called Luna 15, and it was supposed to land on the moon, collect a sample, and bring it back to Earth. It certainly didn't hurt that it would have upstaged Apollo 11, but it didn't. It crashed on the moon.
Com a ameaça soviética eliminada, Armstrong e Aldrin aguardavam o sinal verde de Houston para pousar. Eles seriam os primeiros a pousar na Lua, abortar o pouso ou morrer tentando. O módulo lunar foi a primeira espaçonave construída que jamais operaria na atmosfera.
Our design, of course, at that time was mainly driven by aeronautical engineers. The lunar module, of course, was not going to be constrained with aerodynamics. It was going to operate in the vacuum of space.
Mas para pousar na Lua e decolar, o módulo lunar precisava ser leve. Os módulos lunares anteriores eram muito pesados.
So they started throwing away all of the extra stuff. They took out the seats because the astronauts would only fly in 1/6 gravity or in weightlessness, and so they didn't need seats.
A tecnologia de redução de peso produziu um módulo lunar eficaz, mas sua estrutura era muito leve. Em vez de revestimento metálico, a maior parte do módulo inferior era revestida com filme de poliéster. Os astronautas passaram a chamá-la de espaçonave de papel.
Even the parts where there were metal, like the skin of the crew cabin, was just a fraction of an inch thick. So it was like a very taut aluminum balloon.
O projeto do módulo lunar fez os engenheiros superarem seus limites. Uma tarefa particularmente árdua foi projetar o motor do módulo de descida que os faria pousar na Lua. Era preciso ter propulsão variável para que eles pairassem e escolhessem o local de pouso.
So they developed this engine that could be throttled like a car. And if you look at the landing profile, you see that it starts out at 100% and then it throttles down partway through.
Também havia o motor de subida. Sua única função era retornar os 2 homens à órbita. Mas se falhasse, eles estariam fadados a passar o resto de suas vidas na Lua.
The reliability of that one had to be perfect, you know, because you're not leaving if that thing doesn't work. So the idea was in rocketry is simple means high reliability.
As únicas peças móveis eram duas válvulas. Se estivessem abertas, o módulo de subida voaria. Eram 16 horas na costa leste no dia 20 de julho. A missão estava com mais de 103 horas. A Águia estava pronta para pousar na Lua. Michael Collins, sozinho no módulo de comando, circulou a Lua em uma órbita diferente. Estava preparado tanto para uma tentativa de resgate, caso o pouso fosse abortado, quanto para comemorar se tivesse sucesso. As duas naves estavam atrás da Lua e sem comunicação com a Terra. Na base em Houston, Gene Kranz comandava o pouso. Com a interferência, aguardando a Águia sair de trás da Lua, dirigiu-se pela última vez à equipe.
So I called my controllers onto this loop for a very personal conversation, because this was very emotional for me. Emotional moment, and I really wanted to tell my team how much I believed in them, and what I thought of them, and what I felt they were capable of. And that even though this is something that had never been done before, I believe that we were the right team at the right place. And this day we would make it happen. And from that moment forward, no controller would enter or leave the room until one of three things had happened. We would either land on the moon, we would crash attempting to land, or we would abort. And the final two outcomes were not good.
A comunicação com o módulo lunar havia sido restituída, porém havia interferência. Gene Kranz ficou apreensivo.
So it's purely my decision as to how much information is enough. Well, the kind of information you're looking for is telemetry information and voice information. So this is now going through my mind, do I have enough to continue? And the answer was yes.
Okay, Retro, go. Fido, go. Guide, go. Control, go. Telcom, go. GNC, go. Ecom, go. Surgeon, go. Capcom, word, go to continue PDI.
So I gave the crew the go for power descent.
You go to continue power descent. You're a go to continue power descent.
The crew acknowledged their go, and we immediately lost communications again.
Apesar dos problemas, o motor de pouso foi ligado no tempo previsto e a Águia iniciou o procedimento de descida na Lua.
Of course, we were going engine first, face down, so that we could see the landmarks moving from the bottom of the window up to the top of the window, and we could make time and landmark checks.
We had very crude instrumentation and capability measuring at that time, but it was good enough to get the crew started down towards the surface of the moon. But as they got closer to the surface, we had to bring in the landing radar so it could update the crew's knowledge of the actual altitude.
À medida que eles desciam, a concentração de Armstrong voltou-se para a superfície da Lua. Aldrin monitorava os instrumentos do módulo lunar, transmitindo informação para Houston. Mas, de repente, começaram os problemas.
That's affirmative. Program alarm. 1202. 1202.
A 10.200 metros de altitude, estavam com problemas sérios. O computador emitia um alerta de sobrecarga e eles estavam a apenas 6 minutos do solo.
And the computer is throwing out all these alarms and saying, you know, I've got too much to do, and if you don't lighten my workload, I'm just going to give up.
When they did come on, we couldn't look it up in the book to see what the problem was because we were watching where we were going, calling out altitude rate.
You're not exactly sure which path to take. Do we keep working for the landing radar thing, or do we start addressing this question at the computer program alarm?
It was enough to interrupt our train of thought and get us wondering, when's the next one going to come on?
Right in the middle of landing, it was almost as dangerous to try and abort with a bad computer as it was to carry on with the landing.
Mas a Lua continuava se aproximando e os alertas não cessavam.
Go for landing, 3,000 feet. Time alarm. 1201. 1201. Roger, 1201 alarm.
O alerta 1201 era mais urgente que o 1202 e significava que o computador podia desligar completamente. Aldrin seguia transmitindo os dados para Armstrong. Precisavam de um lugar para pousar. Estavam a 600 metros de distância e a 2 minutos das pedras.
As I was looking at my trajectory plot, Neil leveled off at about 400 feet and was whizzing across the surface, and it was far from what we trained for and seen in the simulation.
Neil is looking out the window and he sees this enormous crater. This is a crater the size of a football field with boulders around it that are as big as small cars, you know.
We continue on down the surface. We should have been on the surface by about 10 minutes, and now, as a result of this trajectory problem we had, we're further downrange from our landing site.
Enquanto se aproximavam da superfície lunar, Armstrong preparou-se para assumir o controle do computador em pane.
Now we get to about 500 feet and we take over manual control, and at this time I think Neil could really see that it was going where he didn't want it to go.
Estavam se aproximando da curva da morte. Se passassem desse ponto, seria tarde demais para abortar.
If you ever go below the dead man's curve, you just don't have enough power to go back up and do an abort before you had crashed.
O combustível estava ficando excessivamente baixo. Houston deu prazo de 60 segundos para abortar o pouso.
Forward 60 seconds.
And we did hear the call of 60 seconds, and a low-level light came on. That, I'm sure, caused concern in the control center. They normally expected us to land with about 2 minutes of fuel left, and here we were down still 100 feet above the surface at 60 seconds.
But when I called 1 minute, they were starting down, and then I called 30 seconds, and I was really getting a little anxious at this point.
At about that time, you really start to suck air, and I'm seriously thinking now we have this land abort decision that the crew is faced with. Are they going to have sufficient fuel to land on the moon, or are they going to have to board very close to the lunar surface, which is extremely difficult and extremely risky?
30 seconds forward.
When it got down to 30 seconds, we're about 10 feet or less, and I could see that they were in the final phases. A little bit of drifting, and I could sneak a look out, because at that point I don't think Neil cared what the numbers were. He was looking at the outside.
Contact light. We copy you down, Eagle. Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
O pouso se deu às 16 horas e 18 minutos, horário da costa leste. Ficaram a 6,5 km do alvo. O combustível dava só para mais 17 segundos.
It took us a couple seconds to really realize that we had made it. And then the people in the viewing room start cheering and clapping and stomping their feet. And I'm so tied up emotionally at this time that I literally cannot speak, and I got to get my team back on track. And I wrap my arm on the console and break my pencil. And finally get back on track and call my controllers to attention. Say, okay, all you flight controllers, settle down. Okay, let's get back on with it.
A Apollo 11 estava na Lua. Mas abaixo dos dois astronautas e do módulo lunar, surgira um defeito na etapa de descida que podia causar uma explosão catastrófica na espaçonave. O módulo lunar Águia estava na Lua há 1 hora, e Armstrong e Aldrin completavam os testes pós-pouso. Enquanto isso, um desastre se formava sob seus pés na etapa de descida.
The cold on the moon permeated the fuel line and caused a blockage in the fuel line, which was immediately reported back by telemetry to Mission Control in Houston. That gave us cause for alarm.
A tubulação que fornecia combustível para o motor de descida estava entupida, causando aumento de pressão. Se não desentupisse sozinha, Kranz teria que ordenar abortar a descida na Lua e retornar à órbita.
There was, for the few seconds that this was going on, some thought given to aborting the exploration of the moon and to initiate the launch sequence right away. However, the heat that came out of the engine melted the ice that had formed in the line, and the problem went away.
Desastre evitado, Armstrong e Aldrin preparavam-se para explorar a Lua. 6 horas após o pouso, os dois astronautas estavam prontos para sair do módulo lunar. Em suas roupas lunares, deixaram entrar ar dentro da cápsula para poderem abrir a porta.
When we're all ready and depressurized, we're looking at the gauge as we turned the valve, I think, on the handle to vent the pressure 4 or 5 pounds per square inch, and it went down to the point where it was almost zero fairly quickly. We thought.